So I'm sitting outside this morning in my courtyard of my house, which it looks like shit, but I love it, and this is where I let my dogs roam. So anyway, there was a thread earlier today in one of my primary groups about, I don't know, language policing. Specifically, what came up was when talking about menstruation and uteruses and pregnancies and stuff as a women's issue. There are oftentimes lots of people that say you're being trans exclusionary, or it's not just a women's issue. There are trans men that can menstruate and get pregnant and such. I hate this for many reasons. Primarily with the volunteer work I do, working at the Trans Center and the Truman Center and all the other stuff that I'm involved in and help people with. I end up talking in a lot of public forums that are small groups, not like big public forums, but little groups that oftentimes will contain 18 to 21-year-old people from the university or other colleges or whatever around here. And outside of those people, I never encounter the divisiveness of language and thought policing that I do from that age group of college or I don't know, modern intellectual forums of the campuses and stuff. I don't know. But the reason that this doesn't sit right with me is this inclusion in language of extraordinarily small percentages or exceptions to things doesn't show up in any other avenue or venue of adult conversation. We don't do it in auto mechanics. We don't do it in medicine. We don't do it in politics. Great examples are if I talk about how Volvos are reliable and good for the money. If I'm a mechanic or someone who deals in lots of cars, if I tell you, yes, Volvos are extraordinarily reliable, they're built well, etc., someone can say, oh, well, what about the 2004 and 2005 models in America that, because of contract negotiations or whatever, were made overseas in China for low quality, or their engines or their parts were made very low quality, etc., those aren't reliable. Okay, well, yeah, well, that's, a handful of models of car out of the 100 or so models that they've released in the last 40 years. Like, a mechanic or a car dealer bringing up that, it's irrelevant and doesn't have anything to do with the topic at hand and doesn't really express anything that you need to know for the purpose of the conversation happening. In medicine, we don't do this either. Like, let's say I'm talking to someone who's elderly or someone who has had GI surgery. Whew. Excuse me, I dropped the phone. Let's say I'm talking to someone who's elderly or who has had GI surgery about incontinence. I don't bring up and say, oh, well, there are very rare occasions where incontinence can happen in this avenue, and chronic incontinence could happen to someone who's really young, but generally it's an elderly issue or people that have suffered GI surgical complications or had to have part of their colon removed or whatever. So, like, we don't really do this in any other avenue or venue of adult conversation, whether it's intellectual, whether it's medical, whether it's about cars or whatever. Like, you don't, like, if you talk to someone about video games even, right? Like, I'm almost 40, but I've, like most people my age, I grew up playing video games. So if I talk about video games, I say, yeah, I love video games. And people will be like, well, so what kind of games do you like? Well, action, adventure, and role-playing games or whatever. I don't take the time out of that conversation to bring up the tiny sliver or particular little nebula of role-playing games that I don't really like. Like, let's say that I don't like the type of point-and-click adventures that are point-and-click adventure games that are laid over top of beautiful artwork just to sell the artwork. Like, that's a tiny, tiny sliver of computer games, right? So, like the Benoit Sakal games, like Amerizone and Siberia 1 and 2, that kind of thing. Like, if I'm talking about the kind of video games I like, and I like adventure or puzzle-solving RPGs, I wouldn't bring that up as a negative or a counterpoint to the conversation, because not only does it not matter for what we're talking about, it's a tiny, tiny sliver of exception to the rule that I'm, or not the rule, but the exception to the, oh, my hair looks crazy today, or exception to what I'm talking about. So, I don't know, to me it feels like when you're talking about anything involving feminism, or I talk about medical stuff a lot because that's usually what comes up in the venues that I'm presenting or talking about things. And I've been called a TERF, I've been called a bigot for not specifically bringing up trans men or trans women as like a little counterpoint or as just tacking on to what I'm talking about. But, you know, when you talk about erectile dysfunction or pregnancy or, ovarian issues or uterine issues, you're almost universally talking about a women's issue or a men's issue because higher than 99% of people that experience these issues are very likely to be fairly typical cisgender people. And just because I don't bring those things up, I've had young people call me a TERF or say that I'm not invited to speak at their forum anymore because I don't go out of my way with language every sentence that I say women to say, oh, and also trans women, or, and this can also apply to trans men. I just think that, I don't know, to me it feels like that as an adult, you don't encounter that in person. I've only encountered that type of shit in person with, like, usually white, intellectual, hyper-liberal people that are caught up in smelling their own farts and caught up in this whole new craze of language and thought police that I don't really think that they're going to make it or that kind of effort is going to be acceptable in whatever type of professional environment they end up going into, let alone something like politics or medicine. So, I don't know, like, I see it a lot more online, and I wonder if it's just like, I don't know, like, I know there's a lot of, like, you know, Tumblr snowflake and, you know, Reddit basement rat shit that people throw around at each other, but, like, it feels like to me that outside of that nebula of internet arguing and trying to pick sides and the whole, you know, echo chamber this and private group that, it feels like to me this is a mostly internet problem outside of young privileged intellectuals in a college setting. That's just what it feels like to me. And I don't know, it's just really infuriating because I'm extraordinarily liberal and progressive. I want to include all types of people, no matter what sex parts they have or, you know, how they want to identify with gender markers or sexuality markers. Like, you know, I don't want to exclude anyone from anything when it comes to human rights or medical assistance or anything like that. But yet I get painted in that light a lot by the specific people that I've mentioned simply because I don't constantly use language to express that I am thought policing myself. And I just think that's terrible. And I really hope that this trend dies out because I think it's destroying intellectualism and intellectual conversations in the forum where it needs to happen the most, which is like colleges and professors and older people like me trying to spread good ideas and human rights values and stuff to the next generation, the younger people between, like, you know, 15 and 20 or whatever. So anyway, I promised this video to a couple of you, and I wanted to deliver. So I hope you could hear it okay. There's been some traffic, but this phone seems to be pretty good. So I'm done ranting. So until next time.